In the untamed wilderness of Colorado, a chilling scene unfolds. A helpless Mustang foal, no more than a few months old, writhes in the powerful grip of a massive boa constrictor. Its chestnut coat is streaked with dirt and sweat from the struggle, and its cries pierce the otherwise silent forest. Enter Ethan Walker, a seasoned wildlife conservationist known for his unwavering courage and deep bond with animals. His boots crunch softly on the forest floor as he follows the trail of birdsong and breeze. It's early morning. The sun spills gold over the foothills of the Rockies. Ethan, journal in hand and binoculars slung over his shoulder, moves quietly through the woods. Then he hears it, a sharp, panicked whinny. His breath catches. Instinct kicks in. He bolts toward the sound. Crashing through a thicket, he skids to a halt in a small clearing. There it is, a young Mustang pinned to the earth by a monstrous boa constrictor, at least 10 feet long. The snake's muscles ripple as it tightens around the foal's frail frame. The foal struggles, hooves flailing weakly. "Oh no," Ethan mutters. He drops his backpack, scanning for anything to use as a weapon. The foal locks eyes with him, wide with terror. Determination floods Ethan's chest. He will not let this life slip away. He finds a long, sturdy branch and approaches, speaking softly. "Easy, buddy. I've got you." The snake hisses, its head swiveling toward Ethan. Heart pounding, he meets its gaze, then lunges. He uses the branch to pin the snake's head to the ground. The boa tightens. The foal cries out. Ethan fumbles in his pack, pulling free a rope. With practiced hands, he loops it around the snake's midsection and pulls. It's a brutal tug-of-war, man versus nature. Sweat drips from Ethan's brow. Every second counts. With one final heave, he loosens the snake's grip enough for the foal to break free. It scrambles to its feet, trembling but alive. Ethan watches the boa slither away into the underbrush, unharmed but defeated. The Mustang stands a few feet away, legs shaky, eyes full of confusion and fear. Ethan steps closer, palm out, voice calm. "You're safe now." The foal doesn't run. Ethan kneels and offers a handful of water. It sniffs, then drinks. And just like that, a fragile bond begins to form. Ethan spent the next hour in the clearing, keeping a watchful eye on the young Mustang. The foal's trembling began to ease, and though its legs were still unsteady, it stood without falling. Dirt and sweat clung to its coat, but its eyes, large and expressive, had begun to show a flicker of life again. "All right, buddy," Ethan said, his voice soft and steady. "We need to get you somewhere safe." He rummaged through his backpack and pulled out a makeshift halter, something he always carried on wilderness rescues. As he approached, the foal flinched and stepped back. Ethan immediately lowered the halter and raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." He crouched low, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Gaining the trust of a wild animal, especially one that had just experienced trauma, required patience. The foal's ears twitched. Its nostrils flared as it took in his scent. After a long, tense pause, it took a hesitant step forward. Ethan held his breath as the Mustang sniffed the halter. When it didn't retreat, he gently looped it over its head and secured it. The foal resisted at first, tugging back slightly, but Ethan kept his grip firm yet gentle. "There we go," he said, a small smile crossing his face. "You're a brave one." He gave the foal a moment to adjust before rising to his feet and leading it toward the trail. The forest was quieter now. The earlier chaos had given way to the soothing rustle of leaves and birdsong. As they walked, Ethan noticed the foal leaning into him ever so slightly. The gesture filled him with a sense of responsibility he hadn't felt in years. This Mustang wasn't just another rescue, it was a symbol of resilience, a living testament to survival. The trail wound through dense woods. Sunlight filtered through the trees in dancing patterns across the forest floor. Ethan kept up a steady stream of words, soothing and low. "You remind me of a Mustang I met years ago," he said quietly. "Her name was Star. She had the same fire in her eyes, even after everything she'd been through. I think you'll be just as strong." The foal's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, as if listening. Ethan chuckled softly, the tension in his chest easing. Eventually, they reached a stream. Its water ran clear over smooth stones. Ethan guided the foal to the edge and crouched to fill his hands. He offered the water, and the foal stepped forward, drinking with surprising eagerness. "That's it," Ethan said warmly. "Drink up. You'll need your strength." As the Mustang drank, Ethan took note of the faint bruises along its flanks. The aftermath of its fight with the boa constrictor was evident. He made a mental note to clean the wounds thoroughly once they reached his cabin. This was only the beginning. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something stir deep within: purpose. By the time the forest began to thin out, revealing the open field surrounding Ethan's cabin, the foal's gait had steadied. It still limped slightly, but its determination was unmistakable, mirroring Ethan's own. Ethan opened the gate to a small paddock beside his cabin. The foal hesitated, its head turning toward him as if seeking reassurance. "You're safe now," Ethan said gently. His hand rested on the foal's warm neck. "Let's get you settled." The foal stepped into the paddock, its hooves crunching against the soft earth. Ethan moved quickly, bringing out a bucket of water and a bundle of hay. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, but his eyes never left the young Mustang. The animal stood in the middle of the enclosure, its chestnut coat glistening faintly under the late afternoon sun. Its breathing remained labored, and now that the adrenaline had faded, the limp was more pronounced. Ethan approached slowly, a soft cloth and a bottle of antiseptic in hand. "All right, buddy," he murmured. "This might sting a little, but it'll help." The foal flinched as he reached out. Its ears pinned back in fear. Ethan paused, giving it space. He crouched low, speaking in a calm, steady voice. "I know it hurts," he said. "But I'm not going to let anything else happen to you. You've made it this far." The foal's wide eyes locked onto Ethan's. Slowly, it lowered its head, allowing him to place a hand on its neck. That simple gesture, a surrender of trust, meant everything. Ethan cleaned the wounds with delicate care. The foal tensed and let out soft, distressed sounds but didn't pull away. Scrapes and cuts lined its legs, the painful aftermath of its struggle. A deeper gash along its flank caught Ethan's concern. He made a mental note to monitor it closely for signs of infection. "You're tougher than you look," Ethan said with a small smile. "Most full-grown horses would have given up. But not you." Once the wounds were treated, Ethan stepped back. The foal moved cautiously to the water bucket, drinking deeply. Watching this simple act filled Ethan with relief. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting warm hues across the land, Ethan reinforced the paddock and prepared a modest shelter from his stash of rescue supplies. The cabin wasn't fancy, but it was solid, built by Ethan's own hands over years of living close to the wild. By the time he finished, the Mustang had begun to relax. It stood near the shelter, one leg cocked in a sign of wary comfort. Ethan leaned against the paddock fence, watching with quiet satisfaction. The road to recovery would be long, but for now, the Mustang was safe. The last light of day faded. Ethan pulled out a stool and sat by the fence. The foal's gaze met his, still tinged with fear, but now also with something else, curiosity. "You're going to make it," Ethan said softly, his voice drifting across the quiet field. "And I'll be right here with you." Those words weren't just a promise to the Mustang. They were a vow to himself. Morning arrived with a soft light spilling across the treetops and filtering through the cabin's windows. Ethan stood at the sink, a mug of steaming coffee warming his hands, his gaze fixed on the paddock. The foal shifted its weight gingerly, testing its injured leg. The night had been peaceful, but the battle for recovery was far from over. Ethan stepped outside. The crisp mountain air nipped at his face as he made his way toward the paddock. The foal raised its head at the sound of his approach, its ears flicking forward and then back. Cautious, alert. He carried a small bucket of grain and fresh hay, setting it down near the shelter. "Morning, buddy," he said in a low, even voice. "How are we feeling today?" The foal watched him warily but didn't retreat. Encouraged, Ethan stepped back, giving it space to move on its own terms. After a moment of hesitation, the young Mustang limped forward, its steps uneven but more confident than the day before. Ethan crouched near the fence, observing every movement. The deep gash on the foal's flank had scabbed over, but the skin around it was swollen, a sign of possible infection. He'd have to act fast. Back inside the cabin, Ethan rummaged through his first aid supplies. His years of wildlife rescue had taught him the importance of being prepared, but his stock of antibiotics was dangerously low. He muttered a quiet curse under his breath. There was no choice. He'd have to drive into town to restock. Before leaving, he secured the paddock carefully, double-checking the latch. He left a short note for his neighbor in case of emergency and glanced one last time at the foal before starting down the winding dirt road. The drive was quiet, the truck bouncing along the rugged trail. Ethan's thoughts were clouded with worry. The foal had survived the boa constrictor, but nature was relentless. Infection, fatigue, and fear, these were new enemies. When he returned later that afternoon, his heart sank. The gate was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. He bolted from the truck. "Hey, buddy," he called out, rushing to the paddock. It was empty. The grain bucket lay tipped over. Fresh hoofprints led away through the grass. Grabbing his rope, some treats, and his boots, Ethan set out immediately, following the trail. The tracks led him into the woods, where dense underbrush slowed his pace. Then, movement up ahead. He caught a glimpse of chestnut fir near the stream. Relief surged, until he heard a low growl. Ethan froze. Across the stream, half hidden in the shadows, a mountain lion crouched, its golden eyes locked on the foal. The Mustang backed away from the water, its body tense. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Not today." He stepped forward, placing himself between the foal and the predator. Slowly, he reached for the rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't want to harm the animal, only to protect. "Get out of here," he shouted. The mountain lion snarled but didn't move. Ethan fired a warning shot above its head. The sound rang through the trees. Birds scattered. The predator snarled again, then melted back into the forest. Ethan exhaled shakily and turned to the foal. It was trembling, wide-eyed. "You've got a knack for trouble," he muttered, offering a treat. The Mustang stepped forward slowly and nudged his hand. Side by side, they walked back toward the cabin. The bond between them had just survived its greatest test. Ethan barely slept that night. The image of the mountain lion lingered in his thoughts, its golden eyes, the quiet menace in its posture. Every creak of the cabin and rustle of leaves kept him on edge. He sat by the window, watching over the paddock where the foal now rested. The Mustang lay in the straw under the shelter, its breathing shallow but steady. Occasionally, its ears twitched, a subtle sign that the fear had not yet faded. But it was safe. For now. Morning came with a dull gray sky and a steady drizzle that soaked the ground. Ethan tossed on his coat and stepped outside. Raindrops tapped the brim of his hat as he made his way to the paddock. "Hey, champ," he said softly, brushing water from the foal's back. "Let's get you inside." He led the Mustang into the small barn adjoining the cabin. It wasn't much, but it was dry and warm. He laid down fresh straw and placed buckets of clean water and hay nearby. Kneeling beside the foal, Ethan inspected the wounded leg again. The swelling had reduced slightly, but the Mustang still winced at his touch. "Easy, buddy. We're getting there." He cleaned the wound, his hands steady despite the tension in his shoulders. The foal locked eyes with him, its gaze steady. In that moment, Ethan knew the bond between them had deepened. The trust was real now. The storm intensified through the afternoon. Wind howled through the trees and rain battered the cabin's tin roof. Ethan stayed with the Mustang, reading from his old journal and murmuring stories of past rescues. His voice seemed to calm the animal. As evening fell, a loud crack of thunder split the sky. The Mustang startled, scrambling to its feet, panic in its eyes. Ethan stepped in quickly, his voice low but firm. "Shoo, you're okay. I'm right here." He placed a hand on the foal's side. Its body trembled, but it didn't pull away. Slowly, it lowered itself back onto the straw. Ethan stayed by its side until the storm passed. The cabin glowed dimly in the firelight, and outside, the rain began to ease. By dawn, the clouds had parted, revealing a golden sunrise over the damp landscape. Birds returned to the trees, their songs tentative but hopeful. Ethan led the foal back into the paddock. The young Mustang stepped cautiously, but its limp was less severe. It moved with greater confidence, head held a little higher. Watching it graze beneath the morning light, Ethan felt a quiet pride bloom in his chest. They had made it through another storm, together. The next few days brought a quiet rhythm. Ethan and the foal fell into a routine of feeding, cleaning, and gentle walks along the trail near the cabin. Each day, the Mustang's strength grew. Its limp lessened. Its eyes, once clouded by pain and fear, began to reflect alertness and curiosity. Ethan stood on the porch one crisp morning, sipping his coffee as he watched the foal trot lightly in the paddock. A smile touched his lips. "You're getting your fire back," he murmured. After breakfast, he fashioned a simple lead from a length of rope and approached the paddock. The Mustang perked its ears but didn't retreat. That alone was progress. "Let's see how you're doing," Ethan said softly, looping the rope over the young horse's neck. "Just a short walk." They moved slowly down the trail, Ethan keeping a steady pace and pausing often to let the foal rest. The forest was alive with sound, the call of birds, the rustle of squirrels, the distant murmur of a creek. The Mustang's ears twitched at each sound. It was rediscovering the world it had nearly lost. They reached a familiar clearing near the stream. Ethan crouched to fill his canteen while the foal drank eagerly from the cool water. The sunlight filtered through the canopy above, dappling their surroundings with gold. But the peace was shattered by a sudden, sharp crack, gunfire. Ethan froze. The foal startled, backing away from the water with wide eyes. Ethan rose slowly, scanning the tree-line. The sound echoed, heavy and unnatural. Hunters. His chest tightened. He couldn't afford another risk. Gently, he placed a hand on the Mustang's neck, whispering steady reassurances. "We're okay. But we need to move. Now." Keeping low, he led the foal back through the trees, constantly alert for movement. Every twig snap felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. When they finally reached the cabin, Ethan secured the foal in the paddock and locked the gate tightly. He retrieved his rifle and checked the perimeter, scanning for signs of intruders. Nothing. Just silence. But the sense of danger lingered. That gunshot had changed things. The wilderness was no longer just a place of healing. It had become a battlefield. Ethan stood on the porch that night, the rifle resting across his lap. The stars shone brightly overhead, but his thoughts were dark. He watched the foal, its breathing steady, its body finally at rest, and vowed he would protect it at any cost. The following morning dawned cold and quiet. A blanket of mist hugged the trees, and the damp ground glistened under the first rays of sunlight. Ethan stood at the fence, sipping his coffee, eyes scanning the tree-line for any sign of movement. The rifle rested close by. The foal grazed calmly, occasionally flicking its ears toward distant sounds. The threat of the hunters still lingered in Ethan's mind, but for now, peace had returned. He was about to head inside when he heard it, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Not animal. Human. He straightened, hand reaching instinctively for the rifle. A figure emerged from the trees, holding up a lantern despite the daylight. The man moved slowly, unthreateningly. "Morning," the stranger called out, voice steady but gentle. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Ethan didn't lower his guard. "Who are you?" "Name's Thomas," the man replied. "Used to work with the wild horse program north of here. Heard through the grapevine you'd taken in a Mustang." Ethan hesitated, studying the older man's weathered face and kind eyes. Thomas wore a wide-brimmed hat and a worn leather jacket. No weapons. Just a calm presence. "I just want to help," Thomas added. "That foal's lucky to be alive." After a long pause, Ethan finally nodded and stepped aside. "All right. Come on in. But keep your distance." Together, they approached the paddock. The foal lifted its head but didn't shy away. Thomas observed silently for a moment, then turned to Ethan. "You've done good by him. Most people wouldn't go that far." Ethan remained silent, his expression guarded. Thomas continued, "But he's going to need more. Space. Companionship. A chance to run free with his own kind." "I know," Ethan replied quietly. "I just wasn't ready to let him go." The older man placed a hand on the fence. "No one ever is. But letting go doesn't mean letting down. It means giving him what he was born for." They stood in silence, watching the Mustang graze in the golden light of morning. Over the next few days, Thomas stayed on, helping Ethan reinforce the paddock, tend to the foal's injuries, and prepare for what was clearly on the horizon. The decision loomed between them, unspoken but constant: the Mustang couldn't stay forever. Each evening, the two men sat on the porch, sharing quiet conversations over mugs of strong coffee. Thomas spoke of the wild herds he'd worked with, the sanctuary miles to the north, and how the young Mustang might thrive there among its own kind. Ethan listened. He asked questions. He nodded. But the idea of saying goodbye still settled like a stone in his gut. One afternoon, while cleaning out the shelter, Ethan noticed the foal trotting along the fence line with a liveliness he hadn't seen before. Its stride was stronger. Its eyes, bright. There was a restlessness in its movements, a yearning. "He's ready," Thomas said from behind him. Ethan turned, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah. I know." Thomas placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Doesn't make it easier. But this is what you were fighting for." Ethan nodded slowly, eyes on the foal. "I just didn't expect it to come so soon." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat by the paddock under a sky heavy with stars, the Mustang lying peacefully a few feet away. He spoke softly, more to himself than to the animal. "You've come so far. And I guess, so have I." In the stillness, something shifted. Ethan realized this rescue had changed him. He had rediscovered something he'd lost years ago: purpose, connection, maybe even hope. By morning, the decision was made. They would take the Mustang to the sanctuary. The morning air was crisp as Ethan loaded supplies into the back of his truck. The trailer hitched behind it stood ready, lined with straw and padded for the long journey ahead. Thomas double-checked the latches while Ethan prepared the foal, gently fastening the lead rope. "You sure about this?" Thomas asked, watching Ethan with quiet understanding. Ethan gave a slow nod. "Yeah. It's time." The Mustang didn't resist. It followed Ethan willingly up the ramp and into the trailer, pausing only once to glance back at the paddock. Ethan felt his throat tighten but kept his hand steady on the rope. The drive was long and winding. They passed through pine-lined roads, open meadows, and finally into the foothills of a protected range where the sanctuary lay nestled between rolling hills. As they pulled through the gates, a wide pasture unfolded before them, home to dozens of wild horses grazing freely under the morning sun. A sanctuary worker approached, a woman with bright eyes and a warm smile. "You must be Ethan," she said, extending a hand. "We've been expecting you." Ethan shook her hand firmly. "This is him," he said, motioning toward the trailer. Together, they opened the gate and lowered the ramp. The foal stepped out cautiously, hooves clicking against the wooden floor before touching soft earth. It sniffed the air, ears flicking at the sounds of the herd in the distance. "Take your time," the woman said. "No rush." Ethan led the Mustang a few steps forward, then stopped and removed the lead rope. The foal stood still for a moment, then took a hesitant step, and another, before trotting toward the pasture. The other horses noticed. A few raised their heads. One, a gray mare, stepped forward and whinnied. The foal paused, then broke into a gallop, its mane and tail streaming like a banner in the wind. Ethan watched, eyes misting, as the Mustang joined the herd. The young horse moved with freedom, true, wild freedom, its place now among its kind. Thomas stepped beside him, hands on his hips. "You did good, Ethan." Ethan swallowed hard. So did he. They stood in silence, the sounds of hooves and wind filling the air. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something he hadn't known he was missing: peace. Ethan and Thomas remained at the fence long after the Mustang had vanished into the rolling hills, its chestnut coat now just a shimmer of memory beneath the sun. The herd had accepted the foal quickly, their formation shifting to make space, to welcome one of their own. Ethan's hand rested on the top rail, fingers gripping the weathered wood as if it could anchor him. "Feels strange," he said quietly, "like letting go of a part of myself." Thomas nodded. "You didn't let go. You gave him what he needed: freedom, safety, a future. That's not loss. That's love." The breeze tugged at Ethan's jacket. In the distance, the foal raised its head. For a moment, it seemed to look back. Ethan held his breath. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. Then the Mustang turned and ran with the others, wild and unburdened. They drove back in silence, the road winding through the familiar terrain that had once held a frightened foal and a man searching for meaning. The cabin came into view, quiet and still. Ethan paused at the door, feeling its emptiness. That night, the stars burned brighter. Ethan sat alone on the porch, the quiet wrapping around him like a blanket. He could still hear the Mustang's hooves in the dirt, still feel its breath in his hands. He opened his journal. The same one he had carried on the day of the rescue. He turned to a fresh page and began to write. "He came into my life like a storm, sudden, wild, and full of fire. He reminded me how to fight, how to feel, how to care. I didn't save him. We saved each other." As he closed the journal, Ethan looked up at the stars and smiled. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days that followed felt different. The cabin, once filled with the rhythm of care and routine, now echoed with stillness. Ethan moved through his daily tasks like clockwork, chopping wood, cleaning gear, walking the familiar trails, but something was missing. He paused often by the paddock, now empty except for wind-blown leaves and trampled hay. The marks of the Mustang's presence remained, a worn path along the fence line, hoof prints hardened in the dirt, but the life that once filled the space was gone. Ethan thought often about the sanctuary. About the foal. He imagined the young horse racing across open plains, learning the ways of the herd, finding its place in the wild. It gave him comfort, but also an ache that settled deep in his chest. He spent time writing. Pages filled with memories, thoughts, quiet revelations. He reflected on the moment he first heard that desperate cry in the woods. The rush of adrenaline. The fight. The quiet after. Each detail etched in his memory like it had happened just hours ago. One morning, he awoke to find hoof prints leading up to the edge of the paddock, the fresh kind. He followed them with cautious curiosity. Just beyond the trees, at the edge of a sun-drenched clearing, stood a young chestnut Mustang. Taller now. Stronger. The foal. It looked at him, head high, ears forward. No halter, no rope, just wild grace. They stood in stillness, two lives connected by something deeper than ownership or obligation. Ethan didn't move. He simply watched, heart full. After a moment, the Mustang gave a soft nicker and turned back into the forest. Ethan stayed where he was, eyes lingering on the place it had stood. It was enough. A visit. A farewell. A beginning. In the days after the Mustang's brief return, Ethan felt something stir in him, a quiet clarity that hadn't been there before. He had seen with his own eyes the result of his efforts, a wild creature not just surviving, but thriving. The cabin didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The memory of hooves, the smell of damp hay, and the sound of soft nickers lived in every board and beam. The Mustang had left its mark, not just on the land, but on Ethan's life. He spent his mornings writing letters to the Wild Horse Sanctuary, asking about the foal's progress. The updates he received lifted his spirits. The Mustang had bonded well with the herd. It had taken a special interest in a group of yearlings and was quickly becoming a leader among them. Ethan pinned those letters beside the window, each one a badge of quiet triumph. One afternoon, while organizing supplies in the barn, Ethan found an old photograph, him as a younger man, standing beside another rescued horse. He remembered that rescue too, the adrenaline, the hope, the heartbreak. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to get close again. Now, that had changed. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Ethan pulled out his journal. He wrote. Some souls pass through our lives like firelight, brief, intense, unforgettable. They don't stay, but they leave us changed. He didn't need me forever. Just long enough to remember what he was born to be. And maybe, to remind me what I'm still meant to do. He closed the journal and stood on the porch, eyes scanning the horizon. It was time to rescue again. The morning air held the faint scent of pine and new beginnings. Ethan loaded his gear into the truck with deliberate care, saddle blanket, halter, first aid supplies, field notebook. He wasn't chasing any particular lead today, but something inside nudged him forward. A call to the unknown. As he drove down the winding forest road, the tires crunching over gravel, Ethan let his thoughts wander. He reflected on the people and animals whose lives had intersected with his own. The quiet victories. The losses that still echoed. And most of all, the resilience that bound them all together. Hours passed as he traversed the terrain. Eventually, he reached a remote stretch of land where wild herds had been spotted in the past, open meadows dotted with wildflowers, bordered by dense woods. It was the kind of place where a soul could find both challenge and peace. He stepped out of the truck, breathed deeply, and began walking. The forest welcomed him with birdsong and dappled light. He noted hoofprints in the mud, some recent, some old, and signs of movement in the underbrush. His pulse quickened. Then he heard it. A distant whinny. He paused, turning his head toward the sound. It came again, soft, hesitant, but unmistakable. Following it, Ethan carefully made his way through the trees until he found the source. A mare stood in a shallow ravine, one leg trapped between rocks, eyes wild with fear and exhaustion. Nearby, a yearling paced nervously. Ethan knelt, voice low and soothing. Easy now. I'm here to help. It was a scene not unlike one he had faced before. Only this time, he didn't hesitate. He moved with the steadiness born of experience and the compassion rekindled by one unforgettable Mustang. And as he worked to free the mare, Ethan felt it again, that unmistakable sense of purpose rising within. This was what he was meant to do. The mare's breathing was fast and shallow, nostrils flaring as she shifted her weight awkwardly, unable to free herself. The rocks pinned her leg in a way that looked painful but not impossible to escape with careful handling. The yearling, likely her foal, hovered nearby, pacing, distressed. Ethan moved slowly, speaking in low tones. "You're okay now. I've got you. We'll get through this." It took time. He cleared the stones one by one, checking the mare's reactions with each movement. She snorted and flinched but didn't lash out. When the last rock was lifted, Ethan gently guided her leg free. She limped slightly as she stood, testing her weight. Ethan gave her space, watching closely. The yearling nuzzled her side, whinnying softly. It was a reunion born from fear, but also resilience. Ethan backed away, heart pounding, not from fear, but from awe. Nature's quiet strength always humbled him. As he returned to the truck to grab some supplies, bandages, ointment, and water, he spotted movement at the edge of the trees. A park ranger on horseback approached, her face a mixture of concern and surprise. "You the one who called about the wild herd last year?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "And it looks like I found another who needed a hand." Together, they tended to the mare. The ranger introduced herself as Dana, part of a regional monitoring program for wild horses. She'd heard about Ethan from sanctuary staff and local reports. "You've built a bit of a reputation," she said with a smile. "And a good one." Ethan chuckled. "Didn't mean to. Just kept showing up where I was needed." They talked long after the horses had moved off into the safety of the forest edge. Dana invited Ethan to partner on a new initiative, tracking and aiding wild Mustangs across the region. It was a chance to make a lasting impact. He didn't need to think long. "Count me in," Ethan replied. The trail had called him back. But this time, he wouldn't be walking it alone. Ethan and Dana spent the next few weeks preparing for what would be their most ambitious project yet. Maps were spread across Ethan's dining table, dotted with red markers, each one a location where Mustangs had been sighted or reported in distress. Together, they plotted patrol routes, coordinated with local sanctuaries, and stocked Ethan's old truck with new supplies. Each morning began early. They saddled up and rode into remote canyons, across windswept ridges, and through valleys where the sun painted the land in gold and shadow. Dana brought technical knowledge and connections, Ethan brought instinct and a heart sharpened by experience. Their bond deepened, not just in purpose, but in friendship. Dana's laughter broke through Ethan's natural silence, and her relentless optimism reminded him that saving lives didn't have to be a solitary mission. One morning, they followed a set of faint tracks into a dry creek bed. Hidden behind scrub and rocks, they discovered a small, dehydrated colt separated from its herd. It shivered despite the heat, and its eyes were dull with exhaustion. Dana whispered, "Poor thing, probably wandered off and couldn't find its way back." Ethan approached slowly, crouching beside the foal. "We've got you," he murmured. It took patience, gentle coaxing, and all the trust-building tricks Ethan had mastered over the years. But eventually, the colt allowed itself to be touched, then led. They fashioned a temporary sling from old blankets to lift it safely into the trailer. As they rode back to the nearest sanctuary, Ethan glanced in the mirror. The colt lay quietly, head resting on its side, a flicker of life returning to its eyes. "That's number 4 this month," Dana said, breaking the silence. "We're making a difference." Ethan nodded. "Yeah. One step, one rescue at a time." When they reached the sanctuary gates, the staff greeted them with warmth and gratitude. The colt was carried inside, and once again, Ethan felt that spark, the one that had reignited when he first laid eyes on the foal back in Colorado. Only now, that spark had become a fire. The mission wasn't just about one Mustang anymore. It was about all of them. Word of Ethan and Dana's work spread quickly. Ranchers began calling in sightings. Hikers reported distressed animals. Sanctuary coordinators reached out, hoping to collaborate. What had started as a personal journey had become a regional movement. On a cool spring morning, Ethan and Dana stood before a small group of volunteers, students, biologists, horse lovers, all eager to help. Dana handed out maps while Ethan addressed the group, his voice low but steady. "Some of these horses have never seen kindness," he said. "Some have survived things we'll never understand. But if we meet them with patience and respect, they'll respond. They always do." The team split into pairs, fanning out across the foothills. Each carried basic medical supplies, food, and radio contact. Dana rode ahead with two newcomers while Ethan followed a creek trail that had recently seen activity. Hours into the patrol, Ethan came across an older stallion standing protectively over a mare and foal. The foal limped visibly. Ethan dismounted slowly, whispering calming words. The stallion didn't charge, but he didn't move either. Ethan knew the signs. This wasn't just an injury. It was a test of trust. He set down his supplies and knelt in the grass, waiting. Minutes passed. A breeze rustled the trees. Finally, the stallion snorted and stepped aside just enough for Ethan to inch closer. The foal trembled but didn't resist as Ethan inspected the wound, a gash likely caused by barbed wire. He cleaned it carefully, wrapping it with gauze and murmuring reassurances. When he finished, the mare nudged Ethan's shoulder. It was brief, almost accidental, but it left him breathless. Back at camp, Dana met him with a grin. "Heard you made a friend." Ethan smiled. "3, actually." That night, by the fire, the volunteers shared stories of their day, small victories, quiet breakthroughs. Laughter mingled with the sound of crackling wood. Ethan watched them, the firelight dancing in their eyes. This, he realized, was bigger than rescue. It was about community. Healing. Hope. And it was only just beginning. The next few months brought a rhythm to the work. Each sunrise marked the beginning of new rides, new challenges, and often, new stories to carry home. Word of the group's work spread across the state, local papers ran features, and students applied for summer volunteer programs in record numbers. Ethan remained at the heart of it. No longer the solitary guardian of a single foal, he had become a mentor to many. New volunteers watched him closely, absorbing his every move, from the calm way he approached injured animals to the reverence he held for the land beneath his boots. Dana noticed the change too. One evening, as they sat overlooking a meadow dotted with grazing mustangs, she nudged him gently. "You know, you've built something out here. A sanctuary beyond fences." Ethan didn't respond right away. He was watching a pair of colts racing through the tall grass, their silhouettes framed by the setting sun. "It's more than I imagined," he finally said. "And still not enough." She looked at him, puzzled. "There's always another one out there," he added. "Still lost. Still waiting." Dana nodded. "Then we keep going. One at a time." That night, around the fire, Ethan shared the story of the chestnut foal. For many of the new faces, it was their first time hearing it. He spoke of the boa, the fear, the recovery, and the goodbye that changed him. By the time he finished, the fire had burned low. No one said a word. But the silence was filled with resolve. In the heart of the wilderness, under the stars, Ethan realized this wasn't just his mission anymore. It belonged to all of them. And the wild, untamed and unforgiving, had become the very ground where hope took root. As spring gave way to early summer, the hills grew lush and green, dotted with wildflowers and the graceful movements of roaming horses. Ethan and Dana's team had become a trusted presence across the region, not only rescuing and rehabilitating animals but also educating communities about preservation and coexistence. One afternoon, a school bus arrived at the edge of the sanctuary, carrying wide-eyed children for their first field trip into the wild. Ethan stood by the paddock, waiting as the kids stepped off, voices full of excitement and questions. He knelt beside them and pointed toward a small group of yearlings. "See that one with the white blaze? She was born right here, not far from this spot. The children listened, transfixed, as he told stories, not just of struggle and survival, but of transformation and trust. Behind him, the Mustangs grazed peacefully, a living testament to what compassion and patience could achieve. Later, as he walked along the fence line, Ethan spotted a familiar silhouette in the distance. A young chestnut Mustang, strong and wild, paused at the ridge. It looked his way for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the trees. He smiled to himself. "You're doing just fine." That evening, as the team gathered around the fire, Dana shared news of a potential grant that could fund a second outpost. The idea sparked energy, plans for expanded outreach, additional rescue stations, and training centers. Ethan listened, then added, "If we can do for one what we did for him, then it's all worth it." They all knew who he meant. The circle had widened. What began as one act of courage had become a legacy in motion, one that would carry on, long after the last hoofprint faded from the trail. Summer deepened, and with it came new momentum. The grant Dana mentioned was approved, and construction began on the second outpost, an extension of their mission, nestled in the hills miles north of the original sanctuary. Volunteers worked side by side with locals, laying fence posts, clearing brush, and building shelters. Ethan often found himself standing at the edge of it all, watching the framework rise from the soil with quiet pride. One afternoon, while walking the property line, he noticed hoofprints leading toward a shaded grove. Curious, he followed. There, resting beneath an old pine, was a gray stallion, scarred, weathered, but majestic. It looked up, calm and steady. Ethan crouched nearby, letting the silence speak first. Then he whispered, "You've seen some hard miles, haven't you?" The stallion blinked slowly, then turned its head toward the sound of distant hoofbeats. From behind a hill, a group of yearlings emerged, nervous at first, then settling near the old stallion. A leader had returned. And perhaps, like Ethan, he had come full circle. Back at the cabin, Ethan added a new entry to his journal. "Every rescue carries a seed. Some bloom in silence, some in fire, but all leave roots. What started as one Mustang became many. And every hoofprint leads to another life changed." He paused, pen in hand, then smiled. "We're not done yet." The sun dipped behind the ridgeline, casting golden light across the new paddocks. In its glow, the legacy lived on, not in monuments or medals, but in freedom, in breath, in hoofbeats echoing across the land. The morning of the outpost's dedication arrived with a soft wind and skies streaked with golden light. Families, rangers, students, and volunteers gathered near the main corral. Laughter, greetings, and the occasional neigh of a distant horse filled the air. Ethan stood off to the side, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the horizon. Dana approached, handing him a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" he asked. "Your speech," she grinned. "I didn't write a speech." "You did," she said, tapping his chest. "You just haven't said it out loud yet." Ethan stepped up to the front as the crowd quieted. He took a breath, then spoke with the quiet clarity of someone who had lived every word. "We didn't come here to change the wild. We came here to respect it. To protect it. And maybe, to learn from it. Every rescue, every hoofprint, every connection, has reminded me what it means to fight for something greater than ourselves." He looked toward the paddock where young foals grazed beside older mares. "This place exists because of one Mustang. And through him, a mission was born. A legacy that belongs to all of us now." When the ceremony ended, a group of children ran toward the corral, watching in awe as a chestnut foal trotted past, its mane lifted by the breeze. Ethan leaned against the fence, content. Not because the work was finished, but because the next generation had already begun to carry it forward. And as the sun reached its peak, casting light across the valley, a familiar nicker rose from the hills. The wild endured. And so did the hope it carried.